Good morning. I hope that your Thanksgiving went well, that you had some good time to spend with family, and that this new week finds you in a good place. Even if not, I want to again draw attention to a topic I was talking about. I can't remember if it was last week or the week before, about how we're seeing that truth doesn't matter to some folks. And this is a conversation that has taken on many different forms. Um, in one context, it was about the difference between whether something is true or relevant, in that some things are true, but they are trivial, in the sense that while it's true, it doesn't matter in the context that the truth is being brought up in. An innocent example of that would be if you were talking with someone about troubles with your car, and they'd indicated that they really like Apple phones. It's like, okay, well that's great, and they may even have good reasons for liking Apple phones. But if the subject of the conversation is a broken car, unless some way those two can be connected, while the topic and the opinion, and even maybe the facts about why the person likes a particular phone is true, it's not relevant. And what we're seeing play out right now, I think, is that is becoming so obvious to the point where people have to be consciously averting their eyes from the truth in order to try and make sense of some of these different interactions that are going on. So the picture is the first paragraph of an article from American Thinker, which is a decent online source for looking at stuff. It's a good reference point. They tend to have decent writing, and if nothing else, it gives, again, it's a good reference point. It's a buoy on the internet. And in this article, it's talking about the continued revelation of truths about the nature of the election, the way that votes were tabulated, the problems with the machines being used, and then all this, that, and the other. And what's happening, I think, is that folks are still thinking that the truth of this, let's see, how do I want to say that? This is good for all of you who like outtakes. I'm not going to redo this one. The veracity, the authenticity, the reality of the election, based on the results, it should be taken at face value, even with all of these other concerns. And, folks are not supposed to notice that these are the same people who, for more than 3 years, beat the drum about how Russian interference swayed the election in favor of Trump. Now, all of a sudden, all of the problems that existed at that time are gone. And this election was completely legit. And there's a reason for that being a logical conclusion, in the sense that if those folks believed that Russia influenced the election and that was somehow acceptable to conservatives on the right, then this time around, having interference from so the argument is made that there's Venezuela, Cuba, China, all these foreign governments. If Russia can interfere in 2016, then all of these guys could interfere in 2020, and it doesn't matter. The truth of whether Russia interfered or not doesn't matter to those people. And what we're seeing is that as more and more data comes out, similar to what happened with the coronavirus, as more and more data comes out and the picture becomes a bit more clear, we can look back in retrospect, in hindsight, to things that are said and done and understand them a bit better. We can understand, okay, so this isn't just a little suspicious, this is very suspicious. This isn't just a fluke in the statistics of data. This is a genuine problem. And that's true, and it's relevant. Well, it's relevant if you care about election integrity. I think that might have been the word I was looking for, integrity of the election. If that's what matters to you, then these kinds of things these truths are relevant. But if it's not, if what matters most to you is winning by any cost, and it doesn't matter what the truth is of whether a particular candidate is supposed to have won or not, then all of these efforts are going to look like a complete waste of time. They're going to look like a distraction, like a contention when there should be collaboration. Like, look, we won, quote unquote. We won by the methods that we think you won in 2016. So what's the problem? We had our election. We said this is what the results are, and just like you forced us to deal with it in 2016, we're now forcing you to deal with it in 2020. The logic isn't deep. It doesn't survive much scrutiny, but it's not completely absent at the same time. It does make sense what's playing out, how things are happening and whatnot. And so this goes back to a theme that I've talked about with a lot of folks where, truth is not universally viewed as important. Relevancy comes into play, and that's where a lot of folks will get confused in conversations, in discussions, in debates, because they presume that what is relevant for both parties is the same. What's relevant to the discussion for me is the same as what's relevant to the discussion for you. And this is also what fundamentally undermined the civic nationalist philosophical movement, because again, it presumed that the both sides of the argument, so to speak, that both sides of the political spectrum had the same framework for determining what their values were. They just disagreed on the details of those values. But the reality is that there's a completely different framework, which is the reason for the difference in values. What is relevant is not shared any longer. So, conservatives, quote unquote, would argue facts and details, economics, income, taxes, policy, and so on and so forth, because that's what was relevant to them. Whereas for modern liberals, they would argue what would get them elected. It's basically how it goes. They would argue for whatever it was that was relevant to the people that they needed to get to vote for them. And as we see with the reliability of their fulfillment of campaign promises being tragically low, people have been running on trying to help oppressed minorities for well over a century now. And yet people are still having problems. People are still having issues. There's still new boogeymen to go out and to vanquish. What's relevant needs to be shared before the truth matters in the end. And that's the thing that people are trying to learn or figuring out kind of the hard way right now, is that there are a lot of people who do not care about election integrity. There are a lot of people who do not care about how the process might have been botched or bent or broken just for people to win. And this is where there is a fork in the road on how to proceed forward. And it doesn't have to be a binary, but it's probably going to be one, because as people get more emotional, our ability to access higher cognitive functions reduces. Our most simple instinct, fight or flight, is a binary. There isn't a middle ground in there. It's either I'm going to fight the danger or I'm going to run away from the danger. Then there isn't some combination thereof. Even if you switch, it's still like a light switch. It's a binary. So when we're forced into those sort of emotive states where our higher functions are not able to give us any sort of alternatives, it's fight or flight. And so with fight or flight, the circumstance we have with politics is that we either fight to make relevant everybody be on the same page with relevancy. We make people care about the same stuff, or we run away from those values. So we either fight to make people care, or we fly away from the strategies, realizing that it doesn't matter. It's not going to make a difference. Even if we fought and won, the victory would be short-lived, and it's not worth it. And this doesn't say that the foundation of the values is corrupt or anything of that sort. It's just saying that, if what we were trying to build exists only in our minds, if it's just an ideological purity and it is not literally possible in the world, then we should not chain ourselves to thought processes and ideologies which are going to lead us to something which is literally not possible. And this is where it's irony with respect to religious discussions, in the sense that a lot of times people will default to, well, because God can do anything, that such an abandonment of tactics or strategies in our day-to-day lives should never be necessary. That if we're doing something that God has ordained, then we never need to back down. We never need to surrender. We never need to change our behavior. But the reality is that God can do everything, but does not choose to do everything. Like there's a limit that God places on himself. There's a let's see, how do I want to say this? It's not that God can't, but that not everything God can do will glorify God and will be an accurate representation of his traits. And that's before even addressing the things that the Bible quite literally states God cannot do, like lying, for example. So what we're seeing here is that people are faced with that choice, and they don't want to admit that that's what the choice is. People don't want to admit that what's slowly creeping into the reality is that we're either going to have folks fighting to make other people care about the same stuff, or they have to retreat away from that strategy completely and come up with a whole new idea. Return to the foundation and build something new. Because what's been built, again, presumed that it was serving a specific purpose. And if that purpose doesn't really exist any longer, or can't exist, the way that you build a building on the plains is not going to be the same as you would in the high mountains. And so it doesn't matter if a particular type of structure is more aesthetically pleasing. If you're constrained by the circumstances that you're in, and it's not realistic, for example, to say like have a really shallow roof at high altitudes, too much snow is going to build up on it, and it's going to end up crushing the house. So it doesn't matter if you like a more gentle slope on your roof. If you're above a certain altitude and you get a lot of snow, you're not going to be able to do that. You need to build your roof with a much taller angle, or a much higher angle. And so if you're halfway through building this beautiful home, then now you might have to restart from scratch. You might not have the appropriate framing to then just switch to having a whole new roof. Doesn't mean you don't want to build a house, doesn't mean you don't want to build something, but the methods, the specific details that you use to figure out, am I doing this right or am I doing this wrong? That stuff changes. And that's what people are having a hard time giving up. That's what people are having a hard time letting go of, because there's been so much propaganda on both sides of the aisle. There's so much pride invested in, well, this is the specific way that we're going to have to do stuff. Because here's the thing. If the truth doesn't matter because it's not relevant to these folks, the election integrity, then the alternative is, okay, well, then what? We just lose elections? We just let other people cheat, and we just sit there on a principle and not actually play the game as it really exists? Because other people have changed the rules? No, it's like either we play to win or we don't play at all. Like or just accept what's coming, and not complain about it, not create problems for people who are trying to adapt, especially, but getting out of the people's way. It's like, all right, so if we're not going to do something that's effective, and to sit there and snipe at our allies that do something that we don't like. That doesn't help. That doesn't engender a feeling of unity on a side of the political aisle that is desperately in need of genuine unity. And again, that's where the modern left will do a great job at achieving the win. There might be all these different ideological differences, but because they know at some level that the most important thing is winning, at some level, they're going to put aside their differences, and they're going to play the game as it exists right now, and they're going to win. They're going to try to win, And so for this election, what we're seeing is that there's lots of data that shows, that people have done things to try and win, which are easily detectable, which are capable of being proven in a court of law, and we're now seeing that stuff start to play out. But here's the thing, at the end of the day, what happens if it doesn't change? What happens if at the end of all these lawsuits, at the end of all this stuff, they just say, hey, that's the name of the game. They outplayed you and Biden is president. What are people going to do to respond to that? Are they going to have an ability to understand that we are really, truly post-truth? That truth in and of itself no longer matters at all. What matters most is relevancy. And so instead of fighting on truth, we need to be fighting on relevancy, on making people's priorities reflect what our priorities are. it's a tough spot. It's a tough place to be because obviously nobody can leave each other alone. It's an incredibly unpopular position to keep your nose out of other people's business. We see that with the pandemic, folks' opinions on masks and lockdowns and all that kind of stuff. There are a lot of folks, there's a particular Discord that I frequent where, everybody's all in on all of the protective measures necessary to try and keep everybody alive. And they will castigate and frame those who balance the scales differently as somehow being morally deficient. Like, oh, well, you're going to let people die. You're going to get grandma sick and kill her. And it's like, but the truth is grandma's going to get sick and die. How she gets sick and die is something we can guess at, but we ultimately don't know. The same way it's like, I don't know if I'm going to make it to, 60. I'm a big dog, and the big dogs don't last a long time. Or if I'm going to get taken out in a car accident well before that. I don't know when the end is. And so restructuring my entire life to deal with the potential for a particular method to become a problem, that's going to be a personal thing. That's going to be where my opinions are going to have an impact on everybody else. So I can't be left alone, and people can't leave me alone. So if we're going to all be in each other's business, again, this is where we have to understand what the game is that's being played. We have to understand what it is that's being done, who is doing it, and why they're doing it, and understand that truth by itself, this is something I talked about a few weeks ago now. It's like truth by itself doesn't matter. It also needs to be relevant. And if it's not relevant, then you need to do something about that. Having more truth, having more data that the election was rigged or that they cheated or whatnot, if that data doesn't matter, it doesn't matter how much of it you collect. It doesn't matter. It could be totally true. We could have people swearing on the Bible, I went and, fudged the numbers in favor of Biden. But if that doesn't matter, if it's not relevant, if the people who have a choice in the pursuit of these lawsuits, in the processing of the litigation, all that kind of stuff, if they don't care, if the legal system doesn't care, if the system does not find those things relevant, that's going to be a hard day for folks. It's going to be a hard day to all of a sudden realize that really, truly, truth doesn't matter to significant portions of the population, not to mention those who have positions of power and influence. Even if they don't represent the vast majority of the population, they represent the ability to influence a huge portion of the population. That truth literally does not matter, that there is no, at some point they're going to care. No, that doesn't exist. There is no line in the sand which they'll never cross. And when people understand that, they're going to start behaving differently. They're going to start trying something different. And if we got that to that point sooner, then the number of options we have to seek redress, the number of options we have to play the game are going to be more than if we wait till the last minute. Being proactive always gives you more options, and options that are more satisfying than waiting till you're forced to do something, waiting till you're forced to fight or flight. We have choices now that we can make, even now that we can make, to prevent violence, to prevent animosity from growing any worse than it is. But only if we are honest about what's true. If only we are honest about what's really relevant, and then make the changes ourselves, and then start to walk it out. It starts with us, in our personal lives, in our own heads, in our hearts and our souls. It starts with us, and then it goes out. So if you're struggling with that stuff, if you're struggling in your own head and looking outward for solutions, for help, for assistance, read your Bible. Or if you don't have one, tell me. I'll get you one. I'll find a way. If you can't go online for whatever reason and use BibleGateway.com or BibleHub.com or whatever it is, like we'll find a way to make sure you can have a Bible. Like some people I know, they don't have internet access at home. They just use YouTube and social media from like a library. So in that case, an online Bible that's free isn't going to help them. But here's the thing. So read the Bible, pray, align your heart with God's. And what that will do is that will set your perspective right on all this stuff, on being able to admit, let alone accept, just how broken all this stuff really is, and how messy all this stuff really is, and how trying to fix it without God, without Him, with a plan, with insight into people's hearts, and with a desire for them to be repentant, and grace for them that we can't afford on our own. That's the path forward. We right ourselves with God first. We learn about the reality of the circumstances that we are in, and then we make educated choices on how to move forward. Not on our own strength, but on the strength that God gives us, because we know we're not in this by ourselves. We can't fix this by ourselves. By the time it gets to us to fix things, the choices we have are few. The power we have is limited. And even the truth that we can grasp is small. Take care out there. Be wary of pride. Be wary of doubling down, tripling down on this should work this time. If something fails, really look at why. And it's not about truth, it's also about relevancy. If what you're doing doesn't seem to be making the impact that you expected, don't be afraid to really look at it honestly and figure out what the problem is, and then make the change, and then try again. If you need fellowship, reach out. There's prayer. I can try and find time to talk to people, to listen to folks. If you just need to get something out, it's all available. Otherwise, take care.